It's 5:32, so I suggest we get started, and sounds like we're all good, audio visual wise. All right. Welcome everyone to the Public Works Advisory Board meeting. This is a regular meeting here on October 18th, and thank you for everyone joining us today here in the room. And if anyone is also viewing virtually, there will be opportunities for you to make comments if you wish. First, we'll begin our meeting with a moment of silence. And then I would ask if one of our members would
Chair
kindly...
Beal, sorry to interrupt. If we could officially call the meeting to order and establish quorum.
Oh, please do the quorum roll.
Okay, do you want to call the meeting to order first, just as an official matter?
I thought we called the meeting to order.
I missed that. So 5:32, and we'll do quorum check. Advisory Board Member Nava.
Here.
Advisory Board Member Hill. Here. Advisory Board Member Goldman. Advisory Board Member Ingraffia.
Here.
Chair Beal.
Here.
Advisory Board Member Gaffney is not here, and Advisory Board Member, why can't I Irwin is not here. So yes, we do have quorum.
All right. Then we will begin, and if someone would kindly lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Before we get into the agenda, do any board members have any announcements they'd like to make? Seeing none, Mr. Kolick, any announcements?
Thank you, Chair Beal. No announcements tonight from the department.
We'll move to public comment. This public comment period is only for persons who would like to comment on a matter that is not in our agenda. If you have comments on a specific agenda item, we will get to those in turn. So if anyone has something not on the agenda, please come forward. And seeing no one, do we have anyone online who would like to comment?
There's nobody on the Zoom meeting.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to our consent calendar, agenda item A. The following
I'm sorry, Chair
items...
Beal. I apologize. I neglected to note that we have not yet introduced our new maintenance superintendent or maintenance division manager, Carlos Mendoza. That didn't happen in October when I wasn't here. Okay, or no, September rather. So I'd like to just call Carlos up for a brief moment. Carlos took over for Dale Simpson in August, and he's been doing an outstanding job getting projects done very quickly. And so we're really appreciative. He comes out of the Cambria Community Services District. He worked in maintenance there, including his managerial role. So I'll let Carlos give a brief introduction about himself.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it, board members and members of the public. Carlos, I spent 23 years over at the Cambria Community Services District. I oversaw their parks, their open spaces, their trails. Happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to serve the community of Morro Bay, and serving with a great group of individuals at the maintenance division and a great team at Public Works. I'm looking forward to getting a lot of stuff done here. Thank you.
And Carlos is the guy you want to call if there's a maintenance need in the community, or better than calling him or emailing him, if you go to the city's website at morrobayca.gov, on the kind of mid-left there's a service request button, and you can submit service requests that way for issues with sidewalks or trees or roads. It is the most efficient way to get a service request done. Many people believe that the most efficient way is to go through the mayor. The mayor then sends it to the city manager. The city manager then sends it to me. I then send it to Carlos. It's in some cases a day or two may have gone by. If you go through the service request portal, the request goes directly to Carlos or a member of his team. So please do use that, and that's for everyone even sitting at home watching. Thanks, Carlos.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome. Moving back to Agenda A. So these are items in our consent calendar, which include the capital projects update, which is provided for an informational item. We have requests for excused absences. One was from myself from last August, and also there's one from board member Irwin, who is not able to join us today. Is there any council or board discussion on any of those items? Or do you have discussion or questions? No. If there are any public comment on any of the matters under agenda item A, or any online comments?
There's no one on the line with their hands raised.
Okay, thank you. So with that in mind, would anyone like to make a motion with respect to agenda item A?
I recommend that we approve all of the items under item A, consent item A.
Thank you. And a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
So we approve agenda item A, and this brings us to our business items for this evening. Number B1 has to do with the design report water supply evaluation. Hopefully we have a presentation to help us understand that one.
Thank you, Chair Beal. Yes, to present this, we have Dan Heimel of Confluence Engineering Solutions. This is a pretty exciting stage of the project. As some have pointed out in the public comments, this project has been in play for a number of years. And this is sort of an opinion, but it sat idle for a few years. And we hired Dan Heimel to manage this project in, I believe, August of 2022. And since then, he's done a good job. And we are going to be making a recommendation to council to move forward with a phased approach to the project rather than a full build-out approach, which I believe was originally envisioned. And so we are going to be seeking council direction for that and for input as well from the PWAP to help us make that council recommendation. That said, I've recently learned that the mayor has asked that we put together a joint PWAP City Council meeting to discuss this issue. And I believe we're looking at doing that on November 14th. Let me just check my calendar so I don't give anyone the wrong date. November 14th at 3 p.m. That may change, but that's my understanding at this time. That's when it's planned for. And we'll be reviewing this same item again. So PWAB will get to hear it twice. Given that, what we'd like to do is use this item today as an opportunity to do a run of the presentation and to receive feedback from the PWAB. And if there's any substantial feedback that requires us to change our presentation or approach, we'll do that between now and that joint meeting with the City Council. So again, today, rather than look for a PWAB recommendation for the City Council, we're actually looking for feedback because you'll get to interact directly with the City Council at that joint meeting. Cool? All right. Dan, let me just pull up this presentation. I had it here now. One moment, please. Do.
Clicker does not appear to be.
Greg, I have a question. Should we hold our comments till the end, or this is a lengthy agenda, or should we interject when we...
That's a great question. I think you can interject during the presentation on this because, again, we're doing a run of it, and we want your comments, and if that has more flow to it, that would be better for this meeting.
All right, thanks, Greg. Chair Beal, members of the Public Works Advisory Committee, excited to bring this presentation to you today. This culminates the findings of a lot of extensive work, both on the hydrogeo, on the engineering side, the environmental side. Really, the whole recycled water program team has contributed to the information and the recommendations that we're bringing forth today for implementation of the recycled water program. As was noted by, I believe it was Board Member Hill, there's a lot of information in this agenda packet. There's a lot of information in this presentation, so bear with me as we work through it. But we've worked closely with city staff, but we feel all of this information really is helpful for our understanding of the water supply issues, the funding and financing constraints, the steps that the city needs to go through to get from where we are today to construction and operation of a recycled water program. And so we've tried to compile it and summarize as best we can, but there's a bit there. So let's jump into it. And as Greg said, yeah, feel free to jump in with questions when they're fresh in your mind. So our agenda today here really is to cover three primary components. One, we wanted to do a rehash of what are the drivers and the requirements for the city's recycled water project. There are water supply needs, but there are also our funding and financing obligations that require the city to implement a recycled water program. And then we'll go into our recycled water implementation recommendations. And these recommendations are really based on a lot of the detailed technical work that went into the basis of design report, the hydrogeologic study that my colleague Dave O'Rourke, with GSI will present, as well as the water supply evaluation TM, which is the other technical study included in this agenda packet that really looked at the city's water supply and its potential vulnerabilities under current and future conditions, and strategies for how recycled water could improve the reliability and resiliency of that supply. And then finally, the presentation concludes with, what are the steps that are in front of us? What do we need to do to get from where we are today to a recycled water program that is meeting all of the city's water supply needs, as well as the funding and financing requirements. And so our desired outcomes really today are to review the drivers for the project, present the recommendations, and then, as Greg described, really looking for input from the PWAB that we can turn around and provide additional information or detail that might be desired at the next joint PWAB council meeting. So let's just start with the drivers and the requirements. So really, one of the drivers, the key driver for this project it's a water supply driver. It's to develop a local drought-proof water supply to reduce the city's reliance on imported state water that can meet near and long-term water supply reliability as well as resiliency needs. One of the key requirements is the requirement to comply with all of the implementation requirements for recycled water included in the city's 4 different low-interest financing and grant funding agreements, and we'll go into those in more detail. And then third, the third requirement that we wanted to highlight here is really to fulfill city council direction for incorporating recycled water as part of the WRF program. And so this is a graph that I believe I've shown the PWAB in the past. This is an output from the water supply model that looks to evaluate the city's current water supply portfolio and how it's anticipated to fare under a 25-year future hydrologic projection. And I won't go into all the details in terms of how these graphs are put together. There's extensive detail in the water supply evaluation TM into the model, how it's developed, the logic for how it uses the different water supplies. But really the big takeaway here, and it's highlighted in year 24, is that the city's current water supply portfolio is vulnerable to extended droughts. What is anticipated to occur in that 3-year drought period that simulates the conditions that we saw in 2020 to 2022 is that the city would run out of available water supply to meet its needs. And this actually happened in 2022. The city ran out of its available water supply to meet the city's water needs. The only reason the city was able to continue to provide water during that period a year ago, before the historic rains of 2023, is that it had access to the San Luis Obispo County Flood Control and Water Conservation District's excess or unsubscribed allocation state water. That is an external supply of state water that may not be available in the future. And so this is the critical water supply need that we're looking to address. This next slide just shows a breakdown of the allocations of the State Water Project. Can you go back one slide? Sure.
Thanks, Dan. I just want to emphasize that point. So what you're looking at with this graph here, the light blue is when we are relying on the city's stored water. And you can see over the 25-year projection, we have to dip into that maybe 8 times. In the year 2022, which is in this graph represented as year 24, the city ran out of that. The city had no water of its own. The county bailed us out. You might ask, does the county have unlimited water supply? Well, back a year ago, we were all pretty nervous because the county told us we can keep the state water subcontractors, including the city of Morro Bay, whole for their water supply needs until the end of 2023, and then they'd reassess. So we knew that we could rely on it last year, and we did. And we knew that if we had another dry year, which we didn't, but had we had another dry year, we still would have had water till the end of this year. But then after that, there was just a big question mark, which is a pretty incredible thing. Yes, Doug?
This stored allocation, it's not just for the city, is that the county's allocation?
So the stored allocation that's put here, I wouldn't quite call it an allocation, but the stored water that we have in the San Luis Reservoir that is indicated in light blue here is the city's. At least that's how the county sees it. Contractually, it's not that simple, but that's how the county sees it. That red stored water is county stored water that really the county could do whatever they want with. And so the county chooses and has historically chosen to basically backstop any severe extreme droughts and be able to provide the subcontractors with more water. But as Dan will show in a future slide, the county is looking at changing those policies in the long term.
That was kind of a question that I had as a follow-on. So the decision on whether or not to release that water, like Morro Bay per our request, is based on some written policy?
The county has, I think, certain policies where it does make excess water from its unsubscribed allocation available to existing subcontractors. And that has provided a high level of reliability for the city of Morro Bay as well as other state water subcontractors historically. You know, what's going to change and what's kind of highlighted in the next slide is the county has put out a final call to the existing subcontractors indicating that they would like to know if they would like to buy any more additional state water, or drought buffer as we call it sometimes, before they look to put that water to other beneficial uses. The county has multiple competing needs for that water. It has 2 very large groundwater basins in an overdraft condition in the Paso Basin and San Luis Basin that fall under the Sustainable Groundwater Act that need to be brought into sustainability by 2040. There are other communities within the San Luis County that are in need of water as well. And so the county is looking to better manage that water and put it to other uses, which will have significant benefits because a lot of that water right now spills and is lost to everybody, but it will have consequences or will reduce the availability of that water to the existing subcontractors.
Dan, excuse me, could you please explain the spill? It spills, but is that on paper or actual spill or?
So it spills on paper, but it acts just like a spill. So when the city has water reserved for it in San Luis Reservoir, certain operational conditions are met, and that water is removed from the city's storage account. It's not a physical spill, but in essence, it has the exact same effect. That water is then made available to any other state water contractor that has the ability to take that water at that time. And in the city's case, and then largely in the county's case, they just don't have the capacity to take that water in those instantaneous moments. So in essence, it's gone. It is the same as a physical spill.
Dan, when I look at this graph, it suggests to me that there are reoccurring significant droughts, but they reoccur in relatively organized fashion every few years. But I would think that we're experiencing droughts that are going to become increasingly devastating and come increasingly sooner than we expected. And I don't know if that's depicted in that graph. Am I wrong about that?
Are you asking, like, does your projections account for climate change?
Essentially, yes.
So the projections do account for climate change. And so, yeah, climate change impacts are anticipated to be wetter, wet years and drier, dry years. And so, we only looked at a 25-year record here just because it's a little more manageable for people to see and understand. But, the model can be run over hundreds of year periods, and you would see that, yes, there are anticipated to be, more frequent, more extreme dry periods, more frequent, very extreme wet periods, as we saw in 2023. I mean, that was a real sort of juxtaposition of going from the worst 3-year drought we've had on record to a year of historic rainfall. And we can, I think, anticipate, unfortunately, similar conditions moving forward.
And I would add to that it might sound like a very positive thing that we get a lot of water all at once, but depending on how the precipitation comes down in the Sierras, that may or may not actually be a benefit for our water supply. So just because we have wet years doesn't necessarily mean that state water is in a good position that year. It all depends on the snowpack. I say that because another anticipated effect of climate change is the wetter years will be wetter, but they may be warmer too. So if it's warmer, less snowpack.
Wrong computer. So yeah, moving on to the next slide, this is a summary of the state water allocations in San Luis County. We've highlighted the city's allocation in green here. Its water service amount and its drought buffer, those are the numbers that are used to calculate how much state water and how much stored state water it can generate in the supply model. What you can see at the bottom is that district unsubscribed allocation, the 14,463 acre feet per year. That's that supply of water that the city and other state water subcontractors have really benefited from the fact that the district doesn't have any other use for that water. And so it basically generates water available for the city and other subcontractors during dry years should they need it. But as alluded to on the right, the district has this just its final call. Because they want to make better use of that water. Because as I mentioned before, a lot of that water spills and provides no benefit to anybody, whereas all of the countywide taxpayers are the ones paying for that water currently. So that's just a little bit of an overview on the state water allocations. So moving on to the fund.
I have a question.
Yeah, definitely.
So that unsubscribe allocation would be where Los Osos would draw their request from?
Yeah, presumably, Los Osos, those groundwater basins I described, yeah, that would be water that isn't currently allocated to another subcontractor. No.
I would just add that that's up to the district. It's not, yeah, I mean, we think that that's probably true, but they may have other arrangements or transfers or agreements that they may utilize to have that water available for Los Osos.
Okay, moving away from the water supply driver and moving really into the funding and financing requirements. And so I've got a couple of slides here summarizing the recycled water program implementation requirements for the city's 2 low-interest financing loans and then 2 awarded grants. And so just if you look under the implementation requirements, they vary based on the different agreements, but they all are binding and are a requirement for the city to fulfill to be able to access this low interest financing or grant funding. And it varies from multiple injection wells, meaning 1 injection well is not sufficient, to a recycled water production target of 412.5 acre-feet per year in a 5-year time frame. The Title 16 grant specific funding requirements are still under sort of development, as the city hasn't received its formal grant agreement. And then the RWM grant is requiring 2 or more injection wells, is what the language that's included in the draft agreement.
Sorry I continue to interrupt you, but these grants and loans together represent around $150 million of funding.
Dan, I have a question about the CWSRF loan. It says recycled water. Does that include non-potable recycled water?
It does, yeah. So we've had, great question, we had that discussion with their representatives, and so it can be really either form. And then there are also schedule requirements for those funding financing agreements. The city has been working with these funding financing agencies for a number of years. There are deadlines associated with the original agreements. In some cases, those deadlines have been extended. But what we have been hearing is that these funding agencies want to close out these agreements, these programs. They don't want these to linger, and these are the deadlines that the city is currently working with. January 1st of 2025 for the WIFIA loan, August 31st, 2023, though that one is being amended, as I described, through an SRF amendment. And then September 30th, 2025 and September 30th, 2026 for the grant funds. So there are implementation requirements, and there are timelines for those requirements to be implemented, not unlike the time schedule order that the city was under for constructing its new wastewater treatment facility. And then finally, the third driver or requirement is to fulfill city council direction to incorporate the recycled water as part of the WRF program. And so these are just a couple of examples. I mean, there were numerous public meetings, numerous city council decisions that sent the city down the recycled water path. We've just highlighted a couple here as the WRF program EIR certification or the Clean Water State Revolving Fund resolution adoption. The both occurred in 2018 as examples of where the city council directed staff to pursue and implement a recycled water program and enter into contractual agreements that require that. So that's the drivers and the requirements. Now we want to move into the implementation recommendation portions of the program. And so, to address the water supply needs that we described earlier, the first recommendation is this is nothing new. It's implemented inject advanced purified water into the Morro Basin during extended droughts to increase recharge, prevent seawater intrusion, and improve groundwater quality. And how is that going to work? And what are the injection and extraction rates, the number of wells? All of that was information that was developed as part of the basis of design report and the groundwater modeling that supported that. And so this is where I will turn it over to Dave O'Rourke to provide a presentation on that component of the recommendations.
I feel more secure with you here. All right, where am I?
And you can clicker or keep that. Oh, that's unfortunate. That's why we trial run. So I don't know if we got the latest version of the presentation downloaded off SharePoint. Can we pull it down now?
Yeah, I'll have to sit there for a second.
I'm Dave O'Rourke. I'm your geologist with GSI, Morro Bay resident and underground professional. Project system.
I see Dave around town. He's also a musician. Likes to perform at local venues.
Sorry for the delay. As I said, there's been, the basis of design report is a culmination of a lot of work going back about 6 years. Just very briefly, I want to give you a heads up of all the stuff that's been done over the, really the 6-year time frame. In 2017, the initial feasibility study was done, and that's when the groundwater model was built. And we lean on that groundwater model a lot for a lot of the analysis I'm going to be talking about. In 2019, we used the model to do some groundwater quality modeling, looking at seawater intrusion and nitrates. In 2021, we delivered the aquifer characterization work and the selection of the IPR site selection, which originally was, between the Narrows and what's now the permanent easement. And later in 2021, we looked at some alternative injection well locations. And then mainly what I'm talking about tonight is going to be all the field work and the modeling done for the basis of design report that's being delivered. I'm going to give you a very 10,000-foot view here today. The BOD report is available in all of its glory for your review. It's got, about 3 dozen figures, multiple tables. And the appendices, it's got all of the 5 or 6 technical memos that we've transmitted over the last 6 years. Those are in there for reference as well. The injection well construction and testing that's specific to the IPR project here. Last summer, there was contractor selection, and we went through well design and construction. Rolling into September, we performed well design with Pacific well drilling, and we did traditional aquifer testing on it. In October, we did the wellhead design to inject water into the well, and we did a step test. We had to take a pause in November for the state water shutdown because we didn't want to be impacting operations during the production well operations. And in December and January, we performed an extended injection test of over a month in an effort to get a real physically based good handle on what the groundwater velocities are out there. And then since February, we've been analyzing all that data we collected, doing some groundwater modeling and delivering and producing the basis of design report. This basis of design report's not the first time that there has been drilling and aquifer characterization work done out here. Do I have a pointer on this thing? Okay. Anyway, this is, there we go, thank you. This figure shows all of the borings that we've identified historically in the basin. There were a lot of work done at the PG&E plant associated with, contamination out there. There was a whole lot of holes punched in the ground up here by the old, I don't know, it was Arco, a gas station up here at 41 and 1 that had some leaking tanks back in the early 90s. And then there has been traditionally, there's been a few borings done along this alignment that were associated with the seawater intrusion wells that were installed back then. And of course, the city has wells here in what we call the Highway 1 well field. These are the high school wells. So my point is there's a lot of legacy and historical data that we accessed to do this work. There are some detailed cross sections generated in the basis of design report. This is just sort of a very simplified version of those cross sections, and in almost every case, we have at the top of the saturated zone, there's generally a zone of fine-grained sediments, silt and clay, which is generally not considered an aquifer. And then lower, there's sands and gravels that are good for aquifers. And, that's a simplification, but that's generally what we call the conceptual model, which is the way we see things, and it's that way in the injection zone. It's that way by the Highway 1 well fields. So this is just a simplified cross-section. Yes, sir.
Your monitoring well is only about 50 feet from the injection well, is that correct?
That one of them, yes.
So this was all extrapolated from that distance over the whole field, correct?
Well, when we get to the injection test, there was a lot of data taken from that monitoring well. This cross-section is a generalization of almost all of those borings that I just showed you, whether they were up by the gas station or over in PG&E or out by the old treatment plant. They almost all have this stratigraphy, this cross-section. There's 20, 30, 40 feet of clay and silt at the top, and there's, 30, 40, 50 feet of sand and gravel at the bottom.
So nearly identical characteristics there all throughout that area.
Approximately, yes. The total depth of the aquifer is about, at the deepest part, is 70 to 80 feet. These are groundwater level hydrographs. A hydrograph shows water levels through time. I included this. This wasn't specifically part of the IPR or the injection testing. I just wanted to demonstrate. So there's 4 wells here, 2 of them in the Highway 1 field, 1 out by the old cement, or in the old cement plant, and 1 of the high school wells. And so these lines represent, the water level surface in each one of these wells. They're all superimposed. As you're aware, the city doesn't use the wells most of the year, but every November, thereabouts, state water shut down, the wells are used. So you can see, like here's in November of 2019, the wells start getting used, the water levels go down. But come December, January, when you're finished with that, you can see that the water levels recover pretty quickly. So that's the main reason I wanted to show these graphs, is just to demonstrate that every year during the state water shutdown, the water levels go down, and every year as soon as the wells are finished being used, the water levels recover pretty quickly. This 6 to 8 month period here at the end of 2021 was during construction dewatering for the construction of the pumping station. And you see the water levels declined for much longer than the month. That wasn't because the city was using the water. It's because they were pumping the groundwater across the street from the high school. And so water levels, declined because they were dewatering so they could, build that facility. But as soon as that construction was finished, within a month, water levels, recovered back to about their previous level. And then here we had the flood from this January, went up, the water levels went up to, higher than they'd been seen in the last 5 years. So this is just to demonstrate that this aquifer, it responds quickly to pumping, and it responds quickly, it recovers quickly when the pumping stops. These are a couple of graphs that demonstrate historical data for total dissolved solids, which is indicative of seawater intrusion. And without going into too much detail, I'll just point out these graphs for MB3 and 4 in the Highway 1 well field. You can see this large spike in total dissolved solids. This is back in 1991. This is showing you that seawater intrusion did happen here. So this isn't just, we're not talking about something that might happen someday. It happened back in the drought of 88 to 92. It then, the concentrations went down pretty quickly afterwards, but so here in the Highway 1 field, you can see that. This is in the 90s. In the high school wells, they weren't installed in the 90s, so you're not seeing it there. But they're a little closer to the ocean, and you can see that the total dissolved solids did rise this past year or two. They're on the way down again, too. But this is just to demonstrate that seawater intrusion is a real risk here. We're very close to the ocean. These are nitrates in the city's wells. Here in the Highway 1 well field, you can see that we're going back into about 2000 here. They spiked. These nitrates are, we believe it's a legacy fertilizer application from the agricultural fields up gradient. They've been on the way down for the last 10, 15 years, and there's no spikes here in the high school wells, so just kind of laying the groundwork, the base conditions in the aquifer. Okay, I'll talk quickly about the injection testing that we did. The site is in the permanent easement in the Vistra property south of Morro Bay Creek. Initially, after we installed the well, we did traditional pump testing where we pump water out and calculate transmissivity and other parameters of the well to establish well yield. We pumped the well at about 90 gallons a minute. We did a 24-hour constant rate test. We did a traditional, extraction analysis. Then we did injection testing. Initially, it was spec'd to be only a 7-day test. We sort of decided after thinking about things that we would extend that to a longer period of time. And this is where we're talking about the monitoring well that you were asking about. There's a monitoring well about 50 feet away from the injection well. So you may or may not be aware, groundwater moves pretty slowly, right? We're talking about a couple of feet per day in most cases. But, groundwater velocity, we really, at this point in most projects, we're using modeling to determine groundwater velocity. So we thought, look, why don't we extend this injection test? The state water that we're injecting has a different signature for conductivity. So we put a transducer in the monitoring well, and we pumped continuously. We injected continuously at about 100 gallons a minute. And after about 2 weeks, we saw data that we interpreted as meaning breakthrough. So it basically we got a groundwater velocity estimate of 4 feet per day under those conditions. Of course, there's no pumping in the city's production wells at that time. But, this is a really good physically based number to have. And, most projects at this point in their completion really don't have this. The regional board was really supportive of doing this effort. So the injection testing completed, and we proceeded with the analysis and started producing the basis of design report. One thing I'm going to focus here on is groundwater modeling scenarios. We tried to identify places to put the injection wells, and the things that I want to point out are that the injection rate of 887 acre-feet a year, that's a full build-out scenario, right, Dan? That's far more than is anticipated to be even available to inject now. But I believe it was for permitting purposes. They said, well, let's run these full build-out scenarios so we don't have to go back and change the permit later. I think that's correct, yeah. So I'll show you where we ended up selecting the locations for injection wells, and then we tried different levels of groundwater pumping. We really started down around 500 or 600 acre-feet a year, which is what you currently are permitted for, and we amped it up to 1,000 acre-feet per year, sort of in increments. We used the 4 Highway 1 wells, the 2 high school wells. We used MB 13, which is east of Highway 1. It's a mothballed well, but we did a pump test on it a few years ago. It still functions. And then we put a new well in the model across the street from 41, but it could be anywhere. But the point was we wanted to move the pumping sort of away from those 4 really close wells in the Highway 1 field. And then when we did this modeling, what we were looking for in the results, there were 3 constraints we wanted to show that we could meet. The first is that modeled travel times between the injection wells and the recovery wells had to be greater than 4 months. That was probably the primary one we were focusing on. Second, we wanted to avoid injecting at rates so high that it would bring groundwater up above ground surface, daylighting of groundwater. That could be a nuisance, and certainly, we considered that to be an infeasible consideration. And also, we wanted to make sure we weren't, essentially going to be pumping so much that we would dry up the aquifer. We tried to maintain a 50% of saturated thickness during the operations. So this is just one of multiple figures like this that are in the basis of design report, but let me point out a few things. So down here, south of Morrow Creek, we have the permanent easement on the Vistra property. This blue dot in the middle is the well that we installed. We're calling it injection well 1. We then put 2 other wells along in this area of the permanent easement. This area we feel it's desirable because it's farther away from the ocean, so it's got more freeboard between. There's more available headspace for injection there. Also, we know that we've demonstrated that we can inject at 100 gallons a minute there. So we located 3 wells here, then we located 3 more wells here along the western part of the permanent easement, and then we put 2 wells here along the coast. We only put 2 wells. These are I wouldn't say primarily, but these are to protect against seawater intrusion. These 2 wells along the coast, and we anticipate injection rates here will be lower based on the boring logs that we've seen from that legacy data that I mentioned. So I believe these 3 we modeled at 90 gallons a minute, these 3 at 75, and then these 2 at 50 gallons a minute. So the blue lines, well, let's just focus on the black lines. These black lines are what we call particle tracks. We basically inject, we track the movement of water in the model. The red lines show 2 months of travel time. So these ones here on the eastern part of the permanent easement, the red lines are 2 months and then 4 months. So we are maintaining that 4-month travel time constraint that I mentioned was a very important one. Once you get down here, travel time is less of a constraint. We got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 months, 6 to 10 months of travel time from these wells. And over here, again, it's like 6, 8, 10 months of travel time from these coastal wells into the high school wells. So the bottom line is we are, and then here we've got some particles that we put along the coast, and you can see that they are heading out to sea. So we are maintaining conditions during these model runs that protect against seawater intrusion. We are maintaining the 4-month travel time, although these wells here are the closest in meeting that. And again, there's multiple versions of this with different varying amounts of pumping. But we can and we will continue to evaluate, various operational scenarios with groundwater modeling. Yeah.
The need to have the water flow for 4 months is to let nature do its thing. Is that correct?
That's correct. And I should say that's a modeling requirement. And once the wells are installed, and I mentioned we did this sort of ad hoc tracer test where we just used connectivity. I'll call it an intrinsic tracer, something that we noted. There is a requirement to do a more robust tracer test where you put something like xenon or some gas that's totally foreign to the groundwater environment in, so that when it shows up, where it came from. And if you can show the tracer test travel time is only 2 months, then you're good. This 4-month is a modeling constraint that's intended to have a little factor of safety involved. But yes, it is intended to allow the aquifer to filter out the water if there's anything that makes it through the treatment plant.
I would just want to add to that while we do get sometimes some pathogen removal credits for the travel time in the aquifer, the primary driver for the travel time is really it's a response retention time. The Division of Drinking Water, the drinking water regulators want to make sure that there's enough time to detect an upset in the treatment process before that water hits somebody's tap. And so that's what that time in the basin provides, that there's time to get your lab results back from your treatment facility, identify that there was a problem, turn off your extraction wells, develop your mitigation plan to deal with whatever problem that might be. In the city's case, it'll be probably put it into your RO system that you already have for your groundwater supply, so it's probably more easily addressed than other programs. But to provide that time buffer to prevent potentially contaminated water from reaching somebody's drinking water tap. And that's one of the big concerns about direct potable reuse. You may have heard that there are new regulations coming out that allow you to take that advanced treated wastewater and put it directly into the drinking water system. But because of that concern that the regulators have, there are additional treatment requirements, monitoring requirements, certified operator requirements, extensive additional requirements for a direct potable system that really are driving only the largest of large agencies to really consider that at this point. Your LAs, your San Franciscos,
Orange
County. So just wanted to add that it is really a dual benefit for putting that water in the ground.
Yeah, so there will be, if we have these 3 injection wells here, presumably we'd have a couple of monitoring wells, like at least halfway between the injection and the production wells. So if we pick up something in the monitoring wells, that would be, then we'd have time to respond there. Okay, so just a couple of discussion points. It's important to keep in mind these modeling scenarios that are in the basis design report now are the most aggressive, pumping and injection estimates that are currently on the table. So we're injecting as much as we think we'll ever possibly need to do, and we are pumping, as much as we possibly can. So this results in sort of the travel times, the shortest travel times, that we can model right now. If there's going to be phased implementation of this project, or if we are injecting a lower total amount of water, that would result in lower groundwater velocities, a greater residence time, a higher travel time. But even with all these, aggressive assumptions, we still maintained a 4-month residence time. Like I just said, lower rates or phased implementation will result in slower groundwater velocity, and we're going to continue to use this model, to look at the phased implementation and anything else that the council or you would like to see evaluated.
Was there any complications because some of the wells may be in the area where PG&E formerly had its tanks, or am I in?
No. So here's their tank farm, right? Their old tank farm, and we would be injecting north of there. So if you think of that, if you inject into a well, half the water is kind of going to go the opposite direction. So if anything, we'd be pushing against anything that is currently in PG&E. So we're not worried about mobilizing anything that PG&E might still have in the ground there toward the production wells.
Do you know how deep any of the of the contamination from PG&E? How
You know,
into the ground?
I know that the site is closed. I know we looked into it at some length earlier in the project. The thing that concerned us more than PG&E, because again, we'd sort of be pushing the opposite way with the injection. There used to be some sort of construction landfill here, between the injection wells and the creek. But, we found documentation that PG&E, saw it, found it, basically excavated the entire landfill. It was, concrete debris and things like that, but you never know. But they excavated the whole thing and then, put fresh fill in there back in the 90s. So because we're injecting north of PG&E, we don't anticipate mobilizing anything toward the production wells.
Is PG&E open to giving us any data on their monitoring?
Well, it's not PG&E anymore. It's Vistra. I don't believe they're currently doing any active monitoring. DTSC, closed the site several years ago. So they're not doing anything anymore. I know there is still a well or two out there that I've seen. But anything that they did would have to be part of the public record. Yeah, well, remember that a lot of what I showed on that first, those aren't all wells. Some of them are just borings, where they would drill, take soil samples, or maybe grab a water sample. So those aren't all wells. Probably most of them are just soil borings.
Could you just really very in a summary fashion describe what is different here from the previous draft? Is that the testing that you were discussing?
The previous draft of the BOD?
Well, this is called a revised draft, so I assume there was a previous draft.
Yeah, well, I guess Dave, you can speak
Well,
to that.
we provided the model to a third-party reviewer, another local geologist, Cleith Harris Geologists in San Luis Obispo. They provided an extensive third-party review. We, took most of their suggestions. I really don't think much of what we incorporated at their behest or as a result of their review changed these results in any significant fashion. But we did make some changes to, some of the aquifer thicknesses. They pointed out some legacy pump tests that we had not been aware of. So it improved the model, from an accuracy standpoint, but it didn't really change it much from the standpoint of these results that I'm showing on this figure. In the basis of design, I believe their review letter and our initial response letter, it's in the appendices. So you can check everything they said. So there were a couple, the most significant things that they pointed out that we changed is we hadn't been really keeping a close eye on the daylighting of groundwater. It turned out to be not that big an issue, but we had not specifically addressed it in the first round. They suggested using, this model was developed in 2016, 2017, before the availability of LiDAR data. So we incorporated LiDAR data for the land surface and Morrow Creek, things like that. And they very much wanted to see, they interpreted a sort of a paleo channel between where our injection well is and out here, connecting to the ocean, which we incorporated. But again, it didn't really substantively change these results.
As an additional safeguard with respect to what was formerly the PG&E field, at one or more of the outtake wells, will there be testing technology that could detect some of the substances that you might likely see in the PG&E field if they were, in fact, to ever migrate to where the water was being removed?
Yes. There's an extensive list of analytes that have to be monitored, to meet the permit requirements, and they would be, those would apply to these monitoring wells between the injection and the recovery wells. So yes, the things that PG&E investigate and characterize were, I'd call them typical. They're not the only power plant in the country. There's PCBs, there's diesel and gasoline and things like that they kept in the tanks. But yes, short answer is yes.
And I would just add more specifically, so the DTSC, the California Department of Toxic Substance Control, has completed its evaluation of the PG&E site, and it has determined that any corrective action goals have been met, and has established a land use covenant, and as Dave described, just closed its investigation of that site.
It's also worth pointing out, without any pumping or without any project, that the background, the native groundwater gradient is toward the ocean. So to the extent that there may have been any contaminant plumes here, back in the 90s, in the last 30 years, the native groundwater gradient would have moved those toward the ocean. But like Dan said, DTSC has closed the case. There's no further action. And because we're injecting north of that site, we don't think mobilizing anything in PG&E is going to be significant for our project. So,
okay.
Turn it back over to Mr. Lamel.
So, where were we? Okay, so the basis of design report focuses on the full build-out potential of the program, as Dave described. Injection of 887 acre-feet per year. That's a theoretical amount of wastewater that would be available at full build-out of the city, I think last projected occurring in 2040. Currently, we estimate that there's more around probably 600 acre-feet of advanced purified water that could be generated based on the amount of wastewater that the city has available to it. And then we also, as part of the water supply evaluation, TM, analyze the city's near-term water supply and reliability needs. And so it's really based on a combination of those, that one, the reality of not having that full wastewater available, and B, the near-term needs, that the current recommendations for the implementation of the initial phase of the recycled water program were developed. And those recommendations from the recycled water program team at this point are for construction of an initial phase that includes 3 total injection wells, and then to plan for potential future injection wells in the future as demands increase, or as cost recovery opportunities, meaning opportunities to sell potential excess state water or excess recycled water, become available. And we'll dig into those recommendations in more detail moving forward. But just wanted to kind of make that transition from the future theoretical build-out scale of this. And as Dave correctly noted, we've done that because that's how the regulators want to permit it. They want to permit what is the largest scale version of this program that the city would consider implementing, and then the city can implement anything less than that as it needs for water supply reliability.
I have a question. This is probably directed to Greg. Would the fact that we only drill 3 wells, would that be endangering our funding for the project?
No, it would not.
And we will go into that in quite a bit more detail as well. All right, and I think it's a good question, and it speaks to some of those earlier slides on the implementation requirements of the funding and financing. So it's really multiple wells. It's more than one. or more than 2. I think the most restrictive requirement is that 415 acre feet per year of recycled water capacity. That really is what pushes us to 3 wells, and then spoiler, a recommendation for some potential non-potable reuse opportunities. So when we add this new water supply into the water supply modeling, you'll see, what we've done here is we've added the indirect potable reuse recycled water as a new water supply. It shows up in green in these charts. In this scenario, we're just modeling it as sort of a drought proofing strategy. And we're basically having the model only utilize this new supply during years when there are low state water allocations or allocations less than 25%. And what the modeling indicates is that if the city utilizes its recycled water supply during those drought years, it can utilize that water to meet its needs in those drought years, but also B, preserve enough of that stored state water that Greg mentioned earlier to get through those extended drought years with low state water allocations. So what we don't see in this scenario is a deficit occurring in year 24 that we did see in the water supply scenario without recycled water, and we did observe in 2022. Yes, thank you. This is a scenario that models 3 injection wells, so to sort of tie it to the previous slide and the near-term recommendations. So just as we move down through the different recommendations, I promise the other ones aren't as long as the first one. So. The next recommendation is to utilize recycled water for landscape irrigation to offset potable demand, which is as effective, or if in some ways maybe more effective than IPR at times. And then it helps us maintain the indirect potable reuse treatment facility in a readiness to serve condition. As in a recent meeting we had with the WRF subcommittee, the mayor pointed out that one of the things the city observed with the seawater desalination program is facilities don't like to sit there unused. And if you have this treatment system, and if you're only planning on using it in drought years, how are you going to keep it ready so that when that drought comes, it's ready to be used? And so one of the big drivers for recommending incorporating non-potable reuse, that would be a use year over year. It would keep the treatment facility in good working condition. It would keep the operators with having consistent, familiarity with how to run the system. And so that, when we really do need it in those drought years or in an extended state water shutdown, it's a supply the city can readily turn to. And so really, when we looked at non-potable reuse opportunities for this recommendation, we didn't do an extensive evaluation of all of the different reuse opportunities. That work was done in the One Water Plan. That's been done in the previous, planning work that really led up to the WRF program. What we really did is we focused on what are the low-hanging fruit opportunities for where we can deliver this recycled water to offset a significant amount of potable water demand. And so those opportunities really that are in close proximity to the proposed injection wells are Morro Bay High School and Lila Kaiser Park. And the other benefit of these two facilities are currently using potable water from the city's drinking water system. And so it provides that direct water supply benefit by delivering them recycled water and preserving or lowering the demand for potable water on the city's system. And so then we added that into the water supply model. In the scheme of things, it's not, a huge amount of water. We estimated roughly around 60 acre feet per year of non-potable water demand for those two facilities. But again, that's 60 acre feet of reduction in potable water demand. That's enough water for hundreds of houses, if not more, given the city's low water usage. And so it just continues to add to the reliability of the city's water supply. And again, the key takeaway here is we're not seeing deficits occurring in those extended droughts. Greg?
Thanks, Dan. And
I would imagine that the non-potable potable reused water is more expensive than state water, but less than indirect potable waters. Is that correct? Can you characterize how much more expensive than one and less expensive than the other it might be?
We can, and because of the current infrastructure available, it gets a little complicated, but we'll cover that in a future slide. How about that? And I'll let Greg.
Thanks, Dan. Just wanted to mention that building this piece of it out also allows for future expansion. It doesn't take too much imagination to understand that in the future we could go down the bike path with the pipe and water Cloisters Park as well. That's one of the major users. I think we spend around $40,000 a year to water those lawns. And again, that's all potable water that could be offset. But certainly not something that we're proposing in this stage of the project.
Yeah, and and speaking of cost effectiveness, it's also, it can be cost effective in that, connecting users to recycled water requires a lot less infrastructure than injection wells. So it's a way to get more recycled water use to meet those requirements of the funding and financing agreements. And so here's really just kind of a slide that kind of brings it all together. It shows, conceptually, the at least initial, and as Dave mentioned, we'll be continuing to evaluate this with modeling, but, siting of 3 injection wells. We have injection well 1 is already constructed, so that one's going to go where it is. I think based on the high the higher production rates near the bike path, there's a current recommendation for injection well number 3 to be potentially part of the first phase of the program. And then the third well located somewhere along Embarcadero Road. Again, these are the preliminary, but to really provide that seawater intrusion protection benefit that Dave described. And then, with those pipelines, getting to Embarcadero Road and crossing Morrow Creek, we have those opportunities to deliver that non-potable water to the high school and Lila Kaiser Park. And this combination of indirect potable reuse and non-potable does allow the city to get to that target of about 415 acre-feet per year for the near-term phase to meet the funding and financing requirements. So then the next kind of recommendation is, how can we find the most cost-effective way to construct this initial phase of the recycled water program and then operate it? And then also find ways to reduce the construction and environmental impacts. And so we just have a couple of slides on some of the concepts that the recycled water program team is incorporating into the recommendation. One is we've identified these locations for injection wells. Now we need to route the recycled water to those wells. As the PWAB may remember, the recycled water pipeline, the indirect potable reuse pipeline, is extended along Quintana Road, along the bike path, and currently terminates here, somewhat close to injection well number 1. But with injection wells located along Embarcadero Road, as well as non-potable uses at Lila Kaiser and Morro High School, we need to get that water over to Embarcadero Road and north of Morrow Creek. And so we've begun an alternatives analysis of 3 different alignments. And I'll just give you the high level. One follows the Vistra IPR permanent easement here. This is the shortest distance, but has the most hurdles with respect to biological and cultural resources. The second alignment is roughly, I call it the Marine Mammal Center alignment, or the Lift Station 2 Forest Main alignment, but basically it mirrors an alignment south of the power plant that gets over to Embarcadero Road. And this one has probably some of the least or really low environmental impacts, but it would potentially require cooperation from Vistra and PG&E as the landowners in that area. And then the third alignment is what we call the Surf Street alignment. This comes off of Quintana goes up Main Street for a short distance, and then travels along Surf Street. This is the longest of the three alternatives, but has the lowest number of other constraints. It's all within the city right away. There are no biological constraints that we've identified, and we anticipate limited archaeological constraints. To really inform this alternatives analysis, the next step that we need to do is go out and complete biological and archaeological surveys for these different alignment alternatives. And so we'll cover that in a bit. But one of the things I really want to focus in on, and one of the key things, is really getting to Embarcadero Road and getting north of Morrow Creek really opens up a lot of these opportunities that are incorporated into the initial phase recommendation. And one of the key opportunities we really think we have for the city to do that is utilization of the abandoned seawater desal feed line. So I don't know if the PWAB is probably aware, in the 90s, the city invested in a seawater desalination facility. It was dealing with drought conditions. This was before the State Water Project came online. The city did a number of exploratory borings all up and down Embarcadero Road, which were of great benefit to our groundwater modeling and hydrogeologic evaluation effort, but then ultimately constructed a number of seawater desal intake wells here along Coleman Drive and Embarcadero Road that then conveyed seawater through this pipeline to the seawater desalination facility where that water was treated, though limited. It wasn't in operation very long, and then conveyed the concentrate or brine out to the Vistra outfall. With that facility being decommissioned, this pipeline is not currently in use and could be, based on our preliminary engineering analysis, be repurposed to convey recycled water all the way from the T-Pier up Embarcadero Road, existing crossing under Morrow Creek, thus avoiding the need to install another utility bridge, get permits for an open trenching, do a horizontal directional drill across a creek, and then actually continues up along and then turns the corner to Atascadero Road. And so that is one of the key opportunities that we're evaluating and looking to incorporate into the first phase of the recycled water program. The other operational opportunity really has to do with how the city operates its two primary water supplies at this point. And the city really has, at this point, two modes that it operates under. It operates under state water, and when state water is available, the city takes 100% state water, and that water gets delivered to the King's Tank and is treated. Well, it's treated before it gets to the King's Tank and then goes into the distribution system. When state water is unavailable, the city turns to its local Morrow Basin groundwater supply, but has to treat all of that water through the Brackish Water RO facility because of the nitrate contamination. And so it's basically kind of an on-off operation at this point. However, as we move forward, to eliminate the need to treat the groundwater that's pumped as part of the IPR program, so when the city is creating indirect potable use recycled water, it's injecting into the groundwater basin, it's recommended that it then, once that water has met the 2 months travel time requirement that is required by the regulators, the city could then pump that water, and during times when state water is available, blend that water with state water and send it to the King's Tank and ultimately the distribution system. And the significant benefit of that is now we don't have the operational costs associated with the Brackish Water RO facility impacting the city's ability to access its indirect potable reuse water. During periods when the state water system is down, the city would still need to turn to its BWRO just to reduce nitrate contamination, until the point that at some point, if we've injected enough of this IPR water, recycled water, into the basin, the modeling that GSI has done indicates that the nitrate concentrations could get low enough, because the IPR water is very low in nitrate concentrations, that we no longer have to treat the groundwater that comes out of the Morrow Basin or blend it with state water. Okay. That's kind of wraps up the kind of infrastructure pieces of this, the water supply pieces. The last recommendation kind of moves into funding and financing. All right, we'll keep going. Okay, so the last recommendation is really to maximize utilization of the awarded grant and low interest financing and cost recovery strategies. And again, cost recovery is how can the city take surplus recycled water or surplus state water and sell it to others that need additional water with its new reliable water supply portfolio to limit cost impacts to the city and residents and businesses. And so the first part of this is really just a review of the funding and financing components of the WARF program. As the PWAB knows, the city has received multiple low-interest loans, ultimately totaling approximately, with the SRF amendment, which is currently under development and very close to being executed, $159 million of low-interest financing at 0.9% over 30 years. So a very, very favorable interest rate compared to any sort of financing opportunities the city would or any municipality would be looking at today. And a lot of that, well, all of that largely was because the city incorporated recycled water into its program. Without recycled water, the city would not have been eligible for these low-interest funding programs. Additionally, incorporating recycled water in the program made the city eligible and allowed it to be awarded $15.5 million in grant funding, or funding that the city won't have to pay back. And so those are just a reminder where the funding came from. And so one of the things that we tried to do is just try to quantify those savings for, what does that mean in terms of the costs of the recycled water program for the residents. And so we put together kind of two scenarios, both conceptually and then we'll quantify it in a later slide. But basically, the city, had two options. It could proceed with a WARF program that didn't have recycled water, or a WARF program with the recycled water, which it ultimately selected. And the differences there is that, the WARF program without recycled water would have been cheaper, approximately $120 million is, the estimate. But it wouldn't have been eligible for the low interest financing, so it would have had a higher interest rate. It wouldn't have been eligible for the grants, so you wouldn't have had those offsetting costs. And ultimately, at the end, the city wouldn't have a recycled water program that it could turn to address its water supply needs. And so you contrast that with the program that the city selected. Yes, there was a higher purchase price, but because of the lower interest rate, the total repayment cost was lower. The city was eligible for grants, and recycled water is now available to the city as a new component of its water supply. And we translated that into a hybrid car analogy versus buying a gasoline-powered car, just to try to make it more understandable. I'm not sure how much it helped, but we tried. But you compare a gasoline-powered car is cheaper than a hybrid car, but maybe you don't qualify for some, lower interest rates associated with government-subsidized financing programs. Maybe you didn't get any tax rebates because you bought a gasoline-powered car versus a hybrid car that, may have been available. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, now you have a gasoline-powered car that gets lower gas mileage than a hybrid car, so you missed out on that additional value. So those are the conceptual components, and then so we tried to quantify that, or we did quantify that, really. And so when you look at comparing financing at $160 million at 0.9% versus $120 million at 4.7%, the total repayment cost is $41 million cheaper based on the interest savings. And then you add in the $15.5 million of grants that the city was eligible for, plus the $40 million of recycled water infrastructure value that the city now has at no additional cost, you get a total of approximately $96.6 million of value, total value that the city received by incorporating recycled water into the WARF program. And then it also provides cost recovery opportunities. One of the things that we talked about earlier is that the district spills a lot of water. The city spills a lot of water too in San Luis Reservoir. Every time the reservoir spills, the city loses any water that it had in there, and typically the city does have water in there. And so if the city and Greg is working with the district right now on a subcommittee to flesh out and identify opportunities to develop cost recovery opportunities to sell that excess state water to generate revenue for the city's water fund. And that water can have significant value, but that value does range based on the type of hydrologic period that you're in. You're like this, you probably couldn't pay somebody to take the water, right? It's a historic rainfall year. But in normal wet years, that water is estimated to have a value of $200 to $500 an acre foot. And then when you start getting into dry years and drought years, that water has values approaching $1,500 or $2,000 an acre foot. Those were what prices that we saw for water going in 2021, 2022, that historic drought. And so just by having this recycled water program available, it really acts like an insurance policy and potentially or just generates extra state water that the city could consider and look for opportunities to sell in the future. To board member Ingrafia's question about costs. So here's a slide where we broke down all the different variable costs, or you can call them operation and maintenance costs. I think we really kind of try to focus on the variable cost term, because it's just what are the costs to produce the water of each of these different supplies. And again, this is not fixed costs, this is variable costs. So it's based on how much of each supply you're going to use that year and how much you're going to pay for that. So the state water costs about $300 an acre foot to deliver, and that pays for the pumping, treatment, chemicals to treat that water. The city pays a fixed cost for state water of approximately $1,100 an acre foot, but again, this is the variable cost. And that's in some ways what we're comparing these other costs against. To pump groundwater out of the ground is relatively inexpensive. It's about $35 an acre foot is the estimates that we have. However, if you're going to treat it through the brackish water RO facility, that cost goes up significantly to $780 an acre foot. To run water through the advanced treatment plant at the Water Resources Center, to run wastewater through the Water Resources Center advanced treatment plant approximately costs $574 an acre foot. This is a somewhat conservative assumption, again, to board member Ingrafia's comment, to provide water for non-potable reuse. We're assuming it costs $539 an acre foot. We're assuming that we're delivering IPR water for non-potable uses because there are a number of challenges associated with delivering a lower quality recycled water through the IPR infrastructure that I will go into if you want to, but we'll try to avoid for now. Or not avoid, but just move past. So all of these costs were also incorporated into the water supply modeling analysis. So not only did we look at supply, we also looked at cost, operating costs, to help the city better understand how to integrate this new water supply into its portfolio and what are the potential cost implications associated with that. And there's lots of more detail in the water supply evaluation TM about these cost analyses, but this is just a summary slide that shows the costs of the associated costs and cost recovery potential and net variable costs associated with the different scenarios looking at the city's current water demand. So we have current water demand without recycled water, current water demand with IPR, current water demand with indirect potable use and non-potable use, and then current water demand. We did a scenario looking at continuous use of the IPR program, so not just in drought years, running it every year at that 415 acre feet per year amount. And so the cost to produce the water that the city needs is shown in green here, and you will see that that increases as we incorporate recycled water into the portfolio. And that's because it costs more to produce the IPR water at $570 an acre foot than just deliver state water at $300 an acre foot. But I would point out that here, the city ran out of water in year 24 here, and so that is sort of reflected in those cost savings. But as you produce more recycled water, your cost recovery opportunities start to increase, and increase significantly in the continuous IPR scenario. And so if you are able to find buyers for that water, which there's a lot of demand for water in California these days, you can start utilizing those cost recovery opportunities to lower your net operating costs in these different scenarios. And again, a lot more detailed information included in the water supply evaluation TM around these different costs. And if you were to find a way to be able to deliver that lower quality recycled water for non-potable uses, these would come down as well. And the other takeaway is these don't necessarily translate into this is over a 25-year period. So, you know, you're looking at maybe it's $1.5 million over 25 years. You know, it's $150,000 a year cost increase to have a much more reliable, resilient water supply, plus the cost recovery opportunities that come along with it. All right, so pause there, and then we'll go into next steps.
So, put simply, if the recycled water is at full capacity in 5 years, some 400 and some odd acre feet, that would allow us to sell some of the state water that we would otherwise consume and recover some of the prices. So my question is, from the state, maybe this is there's a contractual obligation here, I don't know. But from the state's point of view, it's taking valuable water that might be used elsewhere in the state and presumably sending it to Morro Bay, which really doesn't need it because we have this injection. There are no guarantees, of course, but are we confident that would still be the state's position rather than state saying, I'm sorry, you guys took the initiative, you built this wonderful plant and you're injecting water, and by the way, we're not going to contract with you to give you that much more water out of the state water?
I don't think that there's any concern that the state is going to take away the city's state water. But what I would say is the state is actively looking for agencies to develop their own local supplies. And that is a big reason for why this low interest financing, why this grant funding is available. The state wants agencies to invest in local resilient water supplies so they are less reliant on that state water system. So I would think that the state would applaud the city for taking this initiative, but not penalize it by taking away its state water.
Well, again, I don't want to exaggerate this point, but I can recall vine growers and almond farmers complaining about not having sufficient water. And I can imagine there are lobbyists saying, we really need this water, and it's going to Morro Bay, who is in turn selling it, presumably maybe even back to the same people. Is that really equitable? And so that's why I'm considering, I mean, there's no way to actually foresee what politics might create, but I wonder about the assurance that the water would continue to come to us.
Yeah, I mean, the city has a contractual right to that water through the district. And so, I mean, I think it would take some pretty intense lobbying to take those contractual rights away from urban agencies to give them to farmers would be my impression. But yeah, anything's possible.
If, along that same lines, if we have this contracted amount and by some reason we don't need any of the state water, are we still contracted to pay for a certain amount of water from them?
Thank you for the question, Advisory Board Member Goldman. So, couple ways of answering that. No, not for the variable costs, but yes for the fixed costs. I would also just point out that we have a current allocation of 1,313 acre feet per year, and we never take that much. So for the extra 200 or 300 that we don't take every year, even in full allocation years, we still pay fixed costs that have to do with maintenance of the infrastructure to convey the water here and treatment, but we don't pay the variable costs per acre foot.
If the city already has potentially surplus water, why has it not considered reselling that water previously? Just wondering what's different here.
So currently there's a contractual limitation on our ability to do that with the county. We're working with the county to get that going.
Yeah, I would just add that it goes even beyond just the city and county's contractual arrangement. Historically, the state water contracts have been limited in their ability to sort of trade water amongst themselves. The SLO County and Central Coast Water Authority during the 2012 to 2016 drought tried to do an exchange, and just the state water contracts at the time just made it prohibitive, and they weren't actually able to pull it off. Subsequent to that, the state water contracts were amended through the water management tools, which greatly increased the ability for subcontractors to exchange water throughout the state for the reasons that I think we're speaking to here, and that, you know, the state wants to encourage agencies that have extra water, make that water available to others that might not. Again, referencing the Sustainable Groundwater Act, you know, previously we had no regulatory framework over managing groundwater. Now we have a statewide framework. We have basins all across the state that need to come into sustainability. There's only two ways they're going to do that. They're either going to fallow land and stop pumping, or they're going to invest in supplemental supplies. And so these new contract terms allow the city and the district and others to better and more easily enter into these types of agreements to make that water available.
I'm not sure the amount, but you were saying that we don't really come close to using the allocation. So I'm just wondering why you haven't considered, reselling.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So yeah, I mean, if you're asking why we haven't sold state water, it's because we can't yet. So there's state regulations that have changed recently that have opened this conversation up, and so we're talking to the county about ways to do that. And it's not only us, it's other subcontractors in the area as well.
Okay, so moving into next steps. So here's a slide that really looks to break down the recycled water program into a number of different sort of disciplines or just components. And really what this outlines is the steps that the city needs to get from where it is today with the basis of design report and the IPR pipeline alternatives analysis that's underway to the bottom, which is construction of the recycled water facilities. And I don't need to necessarily go through each and every one of these boxes, but I just want this slide is here to illustrate that there's still quite a bit of work to do to get to where we need to be to meet the schedule requirements for the funding and financing programs. And this work is both really in all disciplines. It's in the hydrogeology, it's in the design of the recycled water facilities, it's in the land use permitting through the coastal development permit, it's in the permitting with the regional board and the Division of Drinking Water, it's within the CEQA and NEPA analysis required for the funding and financing programs, the biological and archaeological surveying I described earlier, and then funding and financing agreements as well. And so,
yeah, I just want to emphasize this slide because you may have all seen some public comments that came in questioning some of the direction of using the Morro Basin or using indirect potable reuse in general. And so the city staff answer to that is construction takes time, and to get to construction, I mean, we have all these steps that'll take a couple of years. Dan earlier put up the contractual limitations with regards to the funding deadlines that we're already pushing back in some cases. We've talked to our funding agencies about potentially pushing back deadlines farther. They have so far given us an indication that they've been very accommodating with the city, and at some point enough is enough. And we have very good reason to believe, based on the basis of design report and all the data that went into that, is that the Morro Basin is a good location to put these injection wells and to inject the water into. So I say that just to acknowledge that there really is limited time to complete this project. The stakes are very high if the city doesn't complete the project because of the funding implications. And we still have a lot of steps to take over the next 2 or 3 years before we can complete.
and so here's a schedule that outlines those steps in time. And so in green, we show where we are today, and in red, we show those completion requirements associated with the funding and financing opportunities. And so there's a little bit of buffer there between the end of construction and that deadline, but that's not a lot of buffer for a program of this complexity. And so just to echo Greg's point, there's a lot of work that needs to get done between where the city is today and where it needs to be by the end of third quarter 2026. And just some question.
And, you know, the penalties for not meeting those deadlines. What exactly might the penalties be? I mean, I know that the agreements afford attractive interest rates and sizable chunks of money. It would be the total cancellation of a loan agreement or a penalty or any way of assessing what some of those delays might cost?
Yeah, I mean, so we've done the analysis. I mean, we do partially look at it. I mean, if the city is unable to meet its obligations under those funding agreements, that low interest financing could get revoked to the tune of the city needing to finance the entirety of the WARF program through another mechanism at interest rates, you know, at the 4.7% was an estimate of bond interest rates back when the funding was originally obtained. You know, I would suspect that they're higher even now with the recent inflation.
I would say that would be catastrophic. Yeah.
And so this slide, probably a little small up there, but it's included in the staff report, just outlines some of the, again, those specific tasks that need to get initiated to get the city to construction, and again, broken down by the different disciplines with some estimated budget amounts. And so that will be one of the things that, you know, the city will be taking to the city council for approval consideration. And just sort of as a conclusion, you know, obviously, hopefully I warned you, there's a lot here in this presentation, but, you know, just to try to sum it up, you know, the city is recommending a phased implementation, or, oh, sorry, the WARF program team is recommending a phased implementation of the recycled water project to allow it to reduce the construction costs of the project, to allow it to streamline construction completion, to deliver a project that addresses the city's near-term and potentially long-term water supply reliability needs. A phased project also provides flexibility for what the future phases could look like, and different opportunities for recycled water use for other components. And then it ultimately allows the city to meet the requirements of its grant funding and low interest financing agreements.
Thank you, Dan. We'll take any questions from the PWAB, or if not, public comment.
I'm sorry for all the questions I seem to have, but and I think I know what the answer is. I suspect it's too early to get any kind of a semblance of an estimate as to I seem to have calculated that there's about $2 million or so that has to be spent on what I'll call the sort of preliminary testing and analysis, et cetera, et cetera. And so that leaves about $7 million left in the fund to create this injection well system. Any ideas? I wouldn't expect you to have an amount, but any ideas to when a cost estimate might be forthcoming as to 3 wells and the conduit and the additional conduits done to the park and the high school? Actually, what the scaled back system might cost?
Yeah, so I would say that a lot of that right now is hinging on that pipeline alternatives analysis. And so that work is underway. I think if we can complete those archaeological, biological surveys and really inform the city what its opportunities are, you know, the shortest distance is what we predict would be the lowest cost, but also faces the biggest environmental hurdles. And so I think once we have that alternative selected and where these pipelines are going to be routed and we have the costs associated with that, we can add in the estimated costs for the 3 injection wells and have, a more concrete cost estimate to be able to bring back to the city. I think, the intent is to try to keep those costs within the current approved WARF budget, obviously. And that's one of the big drivers for trying to right-size this project for the city's water supply needs and meet the requirements of the funding and financing agreements. But unfortunately, what we have seen, even through the course of the construction of the conveyance and the Water Resources Center, is just construction cost escalation. And I'm sure Eric can speak to seeing it in other city CIP projects that it's increasing costs over what, budget estimates may have been, 4 or 5 years ago.
Do we have any additional board questions on this report? Go ahead, Robert.
I really appreciate all the slides in the presentation. I found them to be very helpful in understanding a lot of the information that I had previously read and there were maybe a couple that could have used a little more information, like a key to help understand the colored lines versus the colored dots. Some of those exhibits were missing a key that would be a little beneficial. I also had a question about the recycled water operations and maintenance costs. This slide here showed some dollar amounts for the different types of water sources, and I just want to be clear in my understanding that these are an apple-to-apples comparison. Is this treated water that comes out of the tap, and this is how much each one of these sources costs? It wasn't clear to me that these are a true comparison of the different water sources and what their value is or what their cost is to the city. So that slide could be cleared up a little bit for me. This guy here, it's up on the screen now. It gave us $1 per acre foot, and I'd just like to know that those are comparable dollar amounts for the product. But yeah, I found these slides to be very helpful in summarizing essentially the staff report that I reviewed at home. All my questions were answered by going through these slides, and the images that were provided were very useful. Thanks for all the effort that went into that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And for the larger team. Just speaking to the side, yeah, the intent is for these to be apples to apples costs. Just for example, I can go into more detail, but yes, the intent is that this is treated drinking water hitting the city's water system from these various sources, and our best estimates of costs associated with each of those. But we can make that more clear in the next presentation. Great input.
Dan, when I was reading through all this, a curious thing this is sort of beside this. You're talking about several times in the staff report, it was mentioned that you would inject like 800 acre feet of water, but you'd be able to withdraw 1,000 acre feet. How does that happen?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the city has the right to extract water from the Morro Basin right now without any injection, right? There's a native yield of groundwater that's in the basin that gets recharged from Morro Creek and aerial recharge from rainfall. And so really that 900, 1,000 acre feet of extraction is a combination of the city's ability to extract the water that it injects in that scenario, plus the native groundwater that is in the basin that it currently has rights to already. We really once you put the water into the ground, you kind of need to treat the system as a whole. We would account for the recycled water separately, but that was the estimates of how much water could get pumped out with the enhanced recharge plus the natural recharge.
But you couldn't, you probably wouldn't withdraw that much, because then you'd have seawater intrusion, wouldn't you, Would that be a problem?
No, with the injection, you mean without the injection program?
No, if you injected 800 acre-feet of water and withdrew 1,000 acre-feet of water, wouldn't you have a problem with seawater?
No,
intrusion again?
that's the point of the injection wells that are along Atascadero Road there. They like just like I was describing how the injection wells near PG&E, half of that water is sort of pushing back against PG&E. Those wells along the coast, they're pushing against the seawater. So that's kind of the whole idea. They would prevent seawater intrusion while allowing this increased production from the city's wells.
If we're finished with the questions, before we move on, I wanted to ask for a little clarification on B1. We've got another technical memorandum that we're going to discuss. Is that correct? It looked to me like there were a number of different elements under B1, and you mentioned taking public comment now. Are we done with the presentations?
We're done with the presentation, yes.
Okay. So business item 1 also include, well, I believe, draft water supply evaluation technical memorandum. Is that something we are going to discuss, or what are we doing with that one?
Yeah, so there were really two primary attachments included with the staff report. There was the basis of design report, and then there was the watershed evaluation TM. We've covered that through the course of the presentation. All those colored graphs.
So we're not looking at separate agenda items. Very well. Thank you very much. All right, then at this point in time, do we have anyone that would like to comment on item B1? Seeing no one here, do we have anyone in our virtual audience who would like to comment at this time?
There is nobody with any raised hands in the queue.
Okay. Were you seeking a motion with respect to these reports, or just looking for some feedback, which I believe we've provided some questions and feedback?
Thank you for the question, Chair Beal. It's a good question. When we initially published this agenda, we did not have set that we would have a joint meeting between the PWAB and the City Council, and so the intention was that we were either looking for a motion or some concurrence or some consensus amongst the board members that there would be a recommendation to the City Council. But because we do have that joint meeting coming up, we intend to just have you all confer directly with the City Council at that public meeting.
Okay, very well. Then I believe that concludes agenda item B1. We have one more business item B2. This is review of Los Osos Community Services District draft initial study and mitigated negative declaration for pipeline and intertie project. Will we have a presentation?
Thank you, Chair Beal. It's a short verbal presentation. I just want to make sure we're clear that this is a project by the Los Osos Community Services District that provides water service to around half of Los Osos. Don't quote me on that percentage, but basically the Numbered Streets area and Baywood. And that community services district gets their water from the groundwater basin in Los Osos. Los Osos has no other source of water other than the ground, and that basin has been in critical overdraft for many years. And the CSD is seeking additional water supplies. And right now, their plan is to put a pipe down South Bay that goes to Quintana, then goes east on Quintana, just around the city border, and connects with the state water pipe, otherwise known as the Chorro Valley Pipeline, outside the boundaries of the city. And that water connection, that intertie, would occur before water gets to the city of Morro Bay. And so to get this project going, the Los Osos CSD did an initial study report and a mitigated negative declaration document that I attached to the staff report that outlines the project and all the potential environmental concerns that are as part of this project. And the Los Osos CSD board will be voting on this item soon. They're accepting public comment up until October 27th, which is coming up. And because the city staff does not set policy, as you know, city staff is not going to be making a public comment on this, but we are going to be seeking direction from the city council as to whether or not the city would like to make any public comment on this project that is Los Osos, apostrophe S. And we wanted to bring it to the PWAB to see if any of the board members or any members of the public that are here online have any suggested public comments. In the staff report, staff identified 2 potential concerns. One of those concerns is whether or not the Chorro Valley Pipeline has the capacity to supply Los Osos with state water. And then the other concern is the city of Morro Bay paid into that Chorro Valley Pipeline in terms of paying for the infrastructure costs. And it had, I believe, a 30-year loan that we finally paid off a year or 2 ago. And so staff has a concern or question whether or not there would be any kind of cost sharing with regard to if Los Osos is going to be responsible for any of that legacy cost that City of Morro Bay paid into. I have reached out to the county on these items, and I did supply the PWAB with their response to one of those questions, which was a capacity question. The county, who again has the contract with state water, and therefore has the contracts with the subcontractors, including the city of Morro Bay, and manages the water for us, has stated that there is capacity in that pipe. And they also emphasize that the county owns that pipe and maintains that pipe. So per the contract that the city has with the county, I mentioned earlier that we have an allocation of 13 acre feet per year. If we want to get technical with it, that's for water that's delivered. We don't necessarily have a right to the water until it hits Morro Bay. Now, past practice kind of calls some of that into question in terms of water storage and things like that. And we don't have to go into all that today. That's a bit off topic. But the point is that it's a county pipe that was paid for in part by the city of Morro Bay. And the county says that it has the capacity and that that memo shows that. At the time when we published this staff report, the county had not provided me any detail or backup justification as to the other question about infrastructure costs that the city of Morro Bay paid. But they did today, and so I don't have that available with me. But I did read through that memo from 2001, where the county states that the segment of pipe between, or in other words, the segment of pipe that really only currently benefits the city of Morro Bay, that those costs were shared through the Lake Nacimiento project, and that is the infrastructure cost that the community of Los Osos would be benefiting from. In other words, the capacity in the infrastructure that would allow Los Osos to have water has been paid for on their behalf, is the implication. I have not had a chance yet to talk with the county about this, to ask them questions. And that's just something that I received a few hours ago. So with that, what I would like to do, and I'm interested in hearing feedback from the PWAB, is bring to City Council next week a few options for comment. One option is to explore these 2 questions in more detail with the community of Los Osos, as well as with the county. There's other options as well. We can make other kinds of comments, some that perhaps I haven't thought of. Another potential comment is that we'd like to make a deal with Los Osos instead of have them connect directly with the county pipe. If they connect with that county pipe, the city gets no benefit. There is a potential other arrangement where the city sells water to Los Osos CSD, and that would require a connection as part of the city's water system. But that's not what the community of Los Osos is proposing right now. And so we could ask that instead of moving forward with their current project, they can create another project where they connect directly with the city. Though I don't know that that's going to go anywhere because they are moving forward with this project, and it seems a lot simpler for them. And the city doesn't really have any leverage there. So that's really my presentation. It's for your consideration whether or not there's some options to give to the city council for that public comment period that ends next week, at the end of next week.
So for clarification on
Yep.
that, if they connect to the state pipe outside of the city limits, they're buying the water from the state. If they connect inside Morro Bay city limits, they're buying the water from Morro Bay?
Almost. That's almost true. The only way that Morro Bay could sell Los Osos state water to Los Osos is if it first came into Morro Bay's system. State water comes into Morro Bay's system at the King's tanks. That means that Los Osos CSD, if they were to buy state water from the city, would have to connect at the King's tanks, which if you look at the attachment that shows their project limits, there would be an additional pipe that would have to go down Quintana and then wrap around and get into the King's Tank site.
But then if that happened, then they would be using out of our allotment, right? And if they took it from the state, they would have their own allotment. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So what is the state's position, since it was stated earlier that the state wants to encourage these independent water systems to develop their own independent source of water, which is exactly what Los Osos is not doing?
Thank you for the question. I'm not aware that the state has any position. This is a project between Los Osos CSD and the county.
So basically, you're saying we have no leverage for any suggestions at all on this project?
Well, we have the ability to make a public comment, or the city council does. I don't see any leverage. There's a potential, though, in my view, it's very narrow, that so if Los Osos were to build a pipeline down South Bay, at some point they would have to enter into the boundaries of the city of Morro Bay. And so to build that pipeline through our boundaries, they would have to obtain an encroachment permit from the city. We're exploring whether or not that would be a discretionary permit. Typically, encroachment permits for utilities, so long as the utility meets the city or the jurisdiction's requirement, there's really no discretion to deny a permit of that nature.
I do have one.
But that is something that we're still exploring.
I do have one suggestion, and that would be to request of Los Osos that in addition to this pipeline they're proposing, to put a reclaimed water pipe alongside of it, and with maybe the potential of selling them reclaimed water at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Again, so I understand this. The pipe that Los Osos intends to connect to was in part financed by the city of Morro Bay. That's correct, right?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
The pipe that Los Osos at this point is intending to connect to, that conduit that brings water to Morro Bay was in part financed by the people of Morro Bay. Is that correct? They contribute
Yes.
somewhat to the construction of that.
So my preliminary understanding, and again, I just received this document a few hours ago, is that segment of pipe was in part paid by the city of Morro Bay, but also in part by the Nacimiento project.
Right. So it seems like the barest notion of equity would be that, I mean, the city, the people of Morro Bay at that time made some financial sacrifices to be able to afford that. And so it seems like equity would require that, maybe that amount figured at present day value, and then figuring out some portion of that sacrifice should be borne by the people of Los Osos intending to connect up to it and exact from that a significant advantage. I mean, I think that's at the very minimum.
Yeah, and so that's the question I asked the county. And again, their response is, well, Morro Bay did not pay for that segment of pipe exclusively. There was participation in costs with the Lake Nacimiento project. And the pipe, according to the county, according to their memos from the 1990s, was designed to carry up to 600 acre-feet per year to Los Osos of Lake Nacimiento water. And so that document is an attachment to this staff report. And so the implication, again, I haven't reviewed all the documents, but the implication seems to be that the capacity, the percentage capacity that Los Osos would use as part of this pipe has already been paid for by another party on behalf of Los Osos. I believe that party to be the county. So in other words, Morro Bay did not pay for the pipe exclusively.
I understand that.
They paid a percentage. The other percentage was for Los Osos. And therefore,
well, all right, yes, I understand your point. But then, so I respond, how is that equitable? Because going back to the years where that was done, Morro Bay paid for the percentage of the pipe that would bring water to it.
yes.
The county paid for the percentage of water that would go to Los Osos. Los Osos paid nothing.
It's certainly something to explore. Yeah. And I haven't been able to have a conversation with the county about this yet, and there's still some documents to read. But I'm not sure that even if that were true, as you characterize it, it's unclear to me what leverage the city would have to do anything about that.
But Los Osos has to pay for the new pipe.
Yes.
So, that's all.
Yes, that project is all Los Osos CSD.
So assuming that the information hopefully you've been given is accurate and that there are not capacity issues, are there any other anticipated effects to Morro Bay interests that you've identified, or are we focusing on the cost issue?
I have not identified any. I did see that there was someone made a public comment. I'm not sure if you all had a chance to review that. I think it came in today, that there could be some environmental concerns. And again, part of their pipe would come through the boundaries of the city of Morro Bay, so that's something to consider. I have not dug into that yet, but I will before the council meeting. I didn't see in that public comment, though, that there was something specific that that there was a specific concern, but yeah, again, that's something we'll look at before we take it to council.
Any other questions? Would anyone have a public comment on agenda item B2? Not seeing anyone present for public comment. Do we have anyone virtually?
There is no one in the queue with raised hands.
Okay, thank you. If you are looking for a more formal recommendation, we could consider a motion. I'm supportive of the department using their discretion in terms of identifying effects, as it seems like you've done and examined the project, and recommending comments if you have comments that you would like to see put forward. And as we've noted, just to anyone who happens to be in the public, the comment deadline is October 27th, so of course any individuals can submit their own comments.
Thank you.
So does that conclude B2?
Yes, I got good feedback. I think I've got another option or two to offer to the council. We'll continue to dig into it.
Okay. Thank you for that information. And That's the last of our business items, so before we wrap up, we would just go over any future agenda items. Did you want to explain what you have there for us coming up? Any board recommendations?
So the one future item that I'd like to raise, and we don't have it fully planned out yet, but as the PWAB may know, we do have a consultant on board who's preparing a local road safety plan. There was a community meeting, one community meeting already. We're planning another one for early November, I believe the second week of November, and then we will take the results of those meetings and other data that the consultant has collected and bring it to the PWAB at a special meeting that I think we're trying to get a quorum check for the beginning of December. So that one is coming up. Beyond that, we also want to bring a couple of items to the PWAB for discussion. One is the Beachcomber sewer main project, which we're in design on now, and we've got some decision points there. Another one is the Atascadero main sewer main, and then the Main Street sewer main project that again has some decision points that we'd like to bring to the PWAB for review. So we expect to bring those in January, February.
Thank you. I would be interested coming on to our apparently very big El Nino year and the potential to see a repeat of what happened last year. I don't know how likely that is, but it seems like a possibility. I'd be interested to know an update on response to last year's flooding event, and if there have been any modifications that the city has been able to implement that might reduce the risk of that recurring.
Yeah, that's something we can bring to the PWAB.
Anything else? I think we are just about ready to adjourn. Hearing nothing else, what time is it? This was sort of a long one, 7:48 p.m., so we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting, and I will note that it looks like our next regular meeting is January 17th. That's Wednesday. We do have time off in November, December, and then we have a special meeting Wednesday, December 6th. Is that correct?
I just don't remember if that's been confirmed, so
Not confirmed.
that's the date we're looking at, but once we
Okay.
have that, we'll announce it publicly.
Okay. Personally, I won't be here on Wednesday, December 6th, so I would be looking to someone.
And we also have the joint meeting that we're looking at for November 14th with the city council.
That's the new date. It was originally put out as the 11th, which I think was a Saturday.
That's a Saturday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm free Saturday afternoon. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.